Ladies and gentlemen, this is another episode of the ATACS podcast. This is Adults Talk About Cool Stuff. I am your host today. I am Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. It is August 5th, 2020. Joining me today is Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How's it going, Nate?
Hello, hello.
And we are here today to talk about Gears Tactics.
Gears Tactics.
Mm-hmm. They are Gears...
The tactical Gears.
Mm-hmm. It's, really big football players there that are thinking.
Big brain.
They're using that big brain for some tactics. Which is it's a funny thing to think about in the Gears universe to me.
Yeah, turns out most of the thinking is just like shoot a whole lot and or chainsaw things in half a whole lot. Much like Gears of War.
Yeah. You can throw grenades and curb stomp.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things are big brain plays in Gears Tactics.
Using them big brains.
One of the first achievements you get in this game is the first time you chainsaw someone, you get an achievement that's just tactics! !
I don't think I noticed that.
Made me laugh when it happened.
That is hilarious. Oh man, that's too good. We should say right up front that we are, for as much as anyone cares about spoilers for Gears Tactics, this is a spoilery discussion. So if you do not want to be spoiled, this is your one warning up front. We'll probably mostly talk about gameplay, technically stuff, but if you don't want gameplay spoilers,
the story of Gears Tactics is not that interesting.
No, it's not. I mean, we may end up talking about it, we may not. But also, if you care about gameplay spoilers, there will be those. So this is a no holds barred discussion. And I don't know what'll come up, but this is your warning. So I guess up front, this is a tactics game, and while we can joke about all the meatheads of the Gears universe using their brains, it turns out Gears of War actually translates pretty well to a tactics game.
Yep, it sure does.
Yeah, almost like it's surprisingly a smooth transition.
Yeah, like you could take probably most of the encounters from Gears Tactics and just like put over the same general map and enemy layouts and enemy types into a regular shooter Gears of War, and it would work just fine, and vice versa.
Yep.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's kind of neat. Like when they first announced Gears Tactics, I was like, it's probably gonna, I don't know what that's gonna be like. Like they'll probably have to come up with some weird systems, and and it may or may not work, and like, are they going to try and keep it too much like Gears and then it doesn't work like a tactics game? Or are they going to try and make it too much of a tactics and it doesn't feel like Gears, and like, why are they calling this Gears? Or who knows what, like. But it turns out it actually was just a good match. Like it both feels like a tactics game and it feels like a Gears game. Like it hits both of those notes. And that's probably one of the most successful like parts of this game, is that I think it is a competent tactics game, and it also feels like it has very Gears hallmarks. Like it feels like a Gears game. The
only thing that it does significantly differently from a Gears of War is that it's way too long.
Yeah, that's true. This game definitely has missteps that I'm sure we'll get into.
There are things that are different about it from Gears of War that don't work, that are also just not things that needed to be there for it to be a tactics game either. Just sort of some strange design decisions for sure, but we'll get more into that, because I do think it's worth talking about what the game does well, because it does a lot of stuff well. Yeah,
and some of my favorite things are actually the way they translated some of what you think of as traditional Gears like gameplay ideas into a tactics game. Like the way you close E-holes with
Mhm.
grenades, I think works well in this game.
Yeah, it makes really tense situations sometimes where you didn't quite clear a mob one turn, and then there's an e-hole spawning behind that mob, and now you're like, okay, I
Right.
have decisions to make.
Yeah.
Do I rush this mob, risk injury and death to try to close this e-hole before it overwhelms me? Do I
Hmm.
back up and just like hunker down and just try to mow down anything that comes out?
Hmm.
There's a lot of those moments in this game.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it gives it, so I guess we should say up front that like this is a tactics game in kind of the XCOM mold
Hmm.
of tactics game. Like it's kind of in that family. It's, it's not a Fire Emblem or an Advance Wars or a,
Yep.
Final Fantasy Tactics. Like it's much more in the XCOM like family tree of tactics games.
Yeah, you move your big beefy dudes around. Some dudettes in there too.
Hmm.
So don't gender discriminate in the Gears universe,
Hmm.
or at least in this game. Um, and you move them into cover, partial cover or full cover, which is directional too. So if things are behind you, then the cover is ineffective. You have Overwatch, so you can cover an area and automatically shoot guys if they move or take actions in that area, which works really well.
Yep. I might even say Overwatch in this game is even more of a factor than in XCOM games.
Yeah, so the difference is it seems small at first, and at first I was like, why did they do it this way? But it really does add something to it. I'm
Hmm.
not sure I can quite articulate exactly what it added for me, but like the difference between an XCOM where you just say Overwatch and the first thing that they see moving they shoot at
Hmm.
versus saying like, okay, Overwatch, but I'm going to give you this little cone and I can make it as big or as small and directional however I want.
Yeah.
And like if somebody goes in that spot, you're going to shoot them. And I guess it's just the little bit of extra control it gives you
It
that is nice.
Yeah, it's both extra control and I think it's interesting because yeah, it's extra control, but it's also more limiting in some ways because I
Yeah.
think in
On its face, it seems more limiting, right? I
right.
can't just hit anyone anywhere. I have to anticipate a little bit.
Yes, because in XCOM Enemy Unknown, like the like almost always, especially on the highest difficulties, the smartest play was inch forward, everyone Overwatch. Inch
Hmm.
forward, everyone Overwatch. XCOM 2 kind of prevented you from doing that because they'd give you timers so you couldn't go
Yeah.
so slow. But you didn't really have to think about Overwatch so much. You just kind of inched Overwatch. But I think the
Yeah.
way Gears does it by giving you a cone that you have to set of where your Overwatch is, it makes you really think about going into Overwatch more because you're like, well, because like if you're in the situation where like I don't know where the enemy is going to come from,
Hmm.
like overwatching is not really a great play. Like you,
Yeah, if you're not sure they're gonna funnel through a specific spot, or you
mhm,
can't just lay your Overwatch cone on top of them, which I did a lot.
right?
Um, but it also did give you the smaller level control of sometimes in XCOM what you would have is I would Overwatch and the guy right in front of me wouldn't move before the guy 50 yards away who
That
I
you have
have
no
no
chance of
chance of
hitting.
hitting,
Yeah,
and the guy way far away would move and make me waste my shot, and then the guy close to me would run up and punch me.
yeah,
Whereas in Gears, you can just be like, no, I only want to hit this guy when he moves,
hmm,
so I'm just going to put the cone right on his face.
yeah. So I think that actually, I actually think I like Gears Tactics' version of
Yeah.
Overwatch better than XCOM.
And it is so like empowering and satisfying when you just like put all four of your Gears Overwatch cones on one spot
Uh huh.
and just guys are running into it.
And they all pop off like simultaneously too, so you just hear
Yeah.
like that pink,
Pink,
and you
pink.
just
Yeah.
and
And there's
then
just enemies melting in this like
yeah,
death zone.
yeah,
It's
it's
great.
really satisfying when that happens too. And they, especially in the early maps, I feel like they really give you a lot of opportunities. Just like, oh, here's a corridor that enemies are going to come
Hmm.
down, line them up, and set up your Overwatch, and just watch
Yeah.
them fall out. I feel like in later maps, you kind of have to work for it a little more. You have
Hmm.
to the maps kind of get bigger and more dynamic, and enemies come from more directions.
Yeah. The
Which is
times I got it most was when I would clear an area just as an e-hole was spawning,
mhm,
the e-holes take a turn to spawn, but you see where it's going to come, and you
mhm,
know guys are going to come out of it the second it opens. And if
mhm.
I could get all 4 of my guys just around it and
Yep.
point inwards with Overwatch,
Yep.
the guys are just coming out of the hole and immediately falling back in dead.
Yep. The late game, I never did that because I would always throw a proximity mine on top of it.
Oh,
So, fun fact, when you throw a
I don't think
proximity
I ever
mine,
did that.
yeah, when you throw a proximity, this is one of the coolest things. If you throw a proximity mine on top of a hole, like the part of the ground that's cracked before the hole opens,
Hmm.
the second it opens, it immediately kills everyone coming out of it and closes the hole.
Wow, that's very useful. I never did that.
It's very
Not once.
powerful.
I
Um,
did have a couple instances where an e-hole spawned underneath my guys, which was always fun.
yeah, it's that's a fun
That's
time.
bad news.
But going back to Overwatch for a second,
Yeah.
like another thing that setting the cones leads to different from XCOM is like enemies can still get around the cones. So like
Yeah.
if
And
you
sometimes
have
they will intentionally.
yeah, like if you have enemies coming from multiple directions or if they have a path they can take that avoids the cone, like you can set a Overwatch cone and enemies can still get to you from the side or something. And like I think that's where it's not as powerful and you have
Yeah.
less control than compared to XCOM is because like you can set Overwatch, but someone could still get right up on you and
Yeah. And I
um,
don't know what all the different like AI levels are in this game, but it seemed like different enemy types would or would not avoid your Overwatches
right.
intentionally. Like the wretches just kind of run at you no matter
Yeah,
what.
the wretches
So
seem
you
to
can
just
just
run straight line at
you
you.
can just throw down Overwatches and they'll run right into it. But like
Yeah,
some of the higher level enemies seem to intentionally avoid it.
yeah. Another thing I thought was interesting is different weapons had different shaped cones.
Mm-hmm.
So like the sniper rifle was a very long and thin
Yep.
cone, but the shotgun was the reverse. It was very short but wide. Um,
Yep.
and then the assault rifle somewhere in between. So like I thought that was also a neat touch of like different different soldiers with different weapons like have different uses in their Overwatch.
Yeah. And
Um,
then the sniper rifle also had the pinning mechanic, which works kind of like Overwatch,
right.
but
You
just
target a
tags
specific
one
unit.
enemy,
Yeah.
and if they move or do anything, you'll shoot them.
Yeah. Which I never really used that much myself,
I didn't really either.
but the enemies use it against you a lot.
Yes, they
Which
do.
is which is another thing in this game is I don't remember XCOM doing much of this, but the enemies in this game use Overwatch all the time.
All the time. Yes.
Um, so you also have to deal with it, and then all the stuff we've said of what enemies can do, like you can run around the Overwatch cone, or like you have all these ways
Hmm.
around it. Like you can try and make use of that, and it really plays into your battle. Like Overwatch is a huge part of this game. I might say
Oh
it is
yeah.
the central mechanic, really.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so like you're constantly positioning in a way so you try and have kind of the Overwatch advantage on the enemy,
Hmm.
and you're trying to set up your Overwatch while avoiding their Overwatch.
Yep.
Um,
And trying to plug e-holes and
yep.
yeah. So I think all those things work together really well to make them the most of the fights feel very dynamic. So like you're constantly getting just areas of the map where it's like, nope, don't go here. You're gonna get shot because it's covered in Overwatches. And like,
Yeah.
oh, there's an e-hole over here. Oh, there's snipers up there pinning guys. Like, it's always changing every single turn. Every turn feels so meaningful
Yeah.
in Gears Tactics.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really like that. And I think they do a good job. Like the other kind of surprising aspect of Gears that I think translated really well was the enemy variety. I think really helped play into those dynamic turns because like you have wretches and clickers, which are your little melee nuisances that are just going to barrel at you, and you really don't want them getting in your face.
Hmm.
And then you have your regular enemy like hammer burst soldiers that are kind of your mid-range rifle
Yep.
soldiers that'll kind of spread around the map instead of overwatches. And then you have your specialty enemies. You have your enemy snipers, your boomers, your
Hmm.
your other like prime targets that are really deadly,
Yep.
but are generally aren't swarming the map. There's generally just a couple of them at most.
Yeah, and usually hard to take down.
Yeah, like the boomers just have tons of health.
They just have tons of health. They don't go into cover or anything. They just walk around in big meat sacks.
Yeah.
But they have so much health.
Yeah, they have so much health. They were hilarious to me because they would just walk, like do the slow walk, like like right into the middle of the battlefield and be like.
They don't move fast and they don't take cover, but
yeah,
they take a lot of hits and they blow up anybody near them.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the Cantos. Is that
Cantos.
That has the torque bow? Or is it the Theron Guard?
Theron Guard has the torque bow. Cantos have like the enemy buff abilities.
Yeah. And
so
then
you definitely want to take them down because, man, they make even wretches take forever to kill.
Yeah, they really buff enemy. It's mostly health they buff, or
I think
what?
it's mostly health. Yeah.
Yeah, they're real bad. So yeah, I think they do a good job of like translating all that stuff from regular gears. That I think works really well. And I think they also like some of the other things they translate from original gears that I think works really well are your melee options, mainly your chainsaw and your like curb stomp executions.
Yeah, and the bayonet.
Yeah. So all of those I think they use really well. So like your chainsaw is on a cooldown, but it is an instant kill if you can get into melee range and chainsaws a regular enemy. It's an instant kill.
Doesn't work on boomers, unfortunately.
Yeah, it doesn't work on every enemy, and some of the melee enemies have basically like, an opportunity attack, to use that language. So it's hard to chainsaw some of the melee enemies.
And some enemies have after death effects. That means you don't want to chainsaw them either. So it does get kind of dicey.
Yeah, I feel like the chainsaw got a little less useful as the game went because you would start encountering more of those kind of enemies.
Yeah.
But if you could like knock them out of it, like the shotgun enemies, they had a melee thing, but once you shot them once, they would like berserk or something.
Yeah. So they had an opportunity attack where if you got close to them, they would just shoot you with the shotgun, which does a ton of damage.
Yeah. So like trying to get in and chainsaw them was very that was a bad idea.
Yeah, but once they've taken any damage, they berserk, and they do more damage on their normal attacks, but they lose that opportunity attack, which lets you get in and do them real good with the chainsaw.
Yeah. So So like I look for opportunities to use the chainsaw. I mean, because an instant kill is very powerful. Like
it's very powerful, and that's not even all it does, because it also helps you with your action economy.
Yeah, so we'll get to the action economy in a little bit because
that's a whole discussion.
Yeah, that's going to be a big discussion. The bayonet I think was even better than the chainsaw, and I think that was mostly probably because of the actions tied to it. Like I'm trying to think of what all the actual differences were between the bayonet and the chainsaw.
Because it didn't take action points to do the movement to bayonet someone.
Right.
So if you were within bayonet charge distance, it was one action to charge all the way to them and kill them.
Right.
Whereas with the chainsaw, you still have to spend actions to move up to them and then chainsaw, which is another action.
Okay. Right. And then, at least for me, all of my vanguards, I gave the free bayonet skill, which made it, if you got a kill with a bayonet, you'd get an action point back.
Yeah, the only downside to the bayonet was you had to have kind of a clear shot to run to them.
Right.
And if they were in cover, you couldn't do it at all.
Right. Yeah. Cover, by the way, another thing that translates very well from regular gears. Got all sorts of arenas with chest-high walls.
Yep.
So I want to get to the action economy, but before that, I guess just touch on the different classes.
Yeah.
And that'll kind of tie into the different actions and skills. But this game has, 5 classes, I think?
It's 5 classes, so everybody has the basic abilities of move. They've got a primary weapon, which each class has different primary weapons. You get a sidearm and an item. For most of the time, the item I used was just grenades.
Yeah.
But you could also have like stim packs for healing and stuff like that.
I always the support class I always use stim grenades, and everyone else I use regular grenades.
Yeah. But yeah, like moving, getting into cover, shooting with your primary or sidearm weapon, doing Overwatch, using grenades. Those are
Mm.
classless overarching abilities. But then, yeah, there are 5 classes that are different.
Yeah, and
Um,
the sidearms are basically pistols for everyone.
yeah, and
Um,
they're not great, but sometimes you don't want to spend the action to reload your Lancer right in that second, so you'll whip out a pistol, they'll finish
yeah,
someone off.
I actually use my pistol fairly often, especially with the scouts. If like
Hmm.
there was a very low health enemy and I just
Yep.
wanted a higher percent chance to just finish it off,
Yeah.
I wouldn't
The
want
other
to waste a
thing
shotgun shot.
Yeah, the other thing that I think every character can do with pistols is the disabling shot,
Yes, which is
which
very key.
which negates any effects on the target if you hit. So like if they're in Overwatch, you can pull
Yes.
out your pistol and disabling shot them and they'll lose the Overwatch.
Yeah, so like as we discussed before, the enemies can enter Overwatch, and there are a couple different skills that will break enemies out of Overwatch, but
Hmm.
kind of the key one, especially at the start of the game, is this disabling shot on the pistol, which everyone has
Hmm.
from the start of the game. So that's at the beginning of the game. That's kind of your only way to like knock enemies out of Overwatch.
Yeah.
Other, I guess, grenades do as well.
Yeah, any explosions or knockback effects will
Yeah.
also knock people out of Overwatch.
Yep. So the 5 classes are kind of standardish spread
Yes.
of what you'd expect. You have your support, which is kind of your healer and buff type of class. Like
Yep.
they have a lot of abilities that can heal soldiers. They have abilities that can like I think they have some abilities that can like provide extra defense or something like that. But I
I
use
think
mine
so.
mostly for healing.
Yeah, they have some healing, some buffs, and some like leadership kind of abilities to like grant more actions to people and that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and they have the chainsaw lancer as their
Yep.
primary weapon.
Yeah, the regular Lancer with the chainsaw. So I actually liked that class pretty well because
They're pretty all around.
they're very well rounded. Like they have the Lancer is a good solid mid range weapon. It's got the melee option with the chainsaw, and for me, I spec all of mine pretty heavily into just pure healing.
Yeah, which is
And
useful.
yeah, and the healing abilities I think are very powerful.
Hmm.
I put some armor on my supports that reduced like healing cooldown for healing
Hmm.
abilities, or maybe it was like a Lancer mod or something. I don't know, but that they were able to heal like every turn,
Yeah.
which was powerful. Like when you need healing, you got it.
Yeah.
Um, then there's the Vanguard, which is kind of like your assault. I kind of view them as like your very aggressive, like forward pushing assault class.
They run in and they break up enemy lines that are all entrenched in cover and in Overwatch. And Vanguard can just run in there and mess them all up.
Yep. So the Vanguard's got the Retro Lancer, which has the bayonet.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of skills that focus on making the bayonet more powerful. They got skills that make them just straight up stronger. They're almost just kind of the beefiest of the classes. Like they get some stuff that just they can just kind of take a lot of hits.
Their Intimidate skill was really useful,
Yes.
which is an area of effect around them that just removes every enemy from cover and interrupts them, like
Yeah.
the disabling shot we talked about. So
I loved that skill. Intimidate was one of
so
my
good.
favorite skills. I think it also made them take bonus damage for the rest of the turn.
it might have, I think, when you upgrade it.
Yeah, I think it had some extra effects, but yeah, a lot of the stuff I used them for was like, yeah, just make them stronger, make them like give them some powerful offensive shots, make their bayonet better. Like they were definitely
Yeah.
my disruptors who just ran in and broke up tough
Yeah,
units.
it's like if you can just get them in the middle of an entrenched line of enemies and use Intimidate and then just start bayoneting people.
Yep. Yeah, they can really mess some people up. Usually they ended up receiving most of my healing from the support because, and another thing the Vanguards had is self healing. If they killed
Yeah.
something or executed something, they would heal themselves.
Yep. Very
Which,
good.
yeah, so like they can kind of keep themselves going in a way a little bit as long as they're the ones doing the killing.
Yep.
So then you got your sniper, which pretty much speaks for itself.
Yeah. got the sniper rifle. They work at a long distance, high damage.
Yep.
A lot of their skills have to do with like gaining actions and reloads as they kill things. At least that's the way I spec all of mine.
Yeah, that's the way I spec as well, and it's very powerful because like the sniper rifle by default has only 3 shots before you have to reload, but the the sniper gets so many stupidly powerful skills that like allow them to reload for free or just straight up give them bonus actions, and like if you stack a lot of those skills together, then
you can just by the end of the game you can just shoot like 8, 9, 10 times with your stupid sniper from a totally safe position on the field. Just
Yep. And if you like, depending on how you do your gear and stuff, like you can have really good accuracy and like.
It's so silly.
Yeah, no, my sniper.
It's really fun, but.
Yeah, it's really fun. My sniper by the end of the game was just a crit machine. It was like.
Yeah.
It would just be popping headshots like left and right, and like you said, you're firing like 8 times a turn. So it's like, all right, I just like blew 5 enemies' heads off with critical shots, and then also hurt this boomer a little bit. Like, it's kind of nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of their skills were action stacking, and they had some like, critical shot. This is a shot with a higher crit chance, or like this is just a higher damage shot. Like they would have some like beefy shots.
The concussion shot was pretty useful, I felt like.
Yeah, because that would like disable an enemy for a turn or something, right?
Yeah, it disables enemy. I think it's a start for 1 turn, and then you can upgrade it to be more often. No, maybe you just reduce the cooldown. Hold on, I'm looking at the tree here. Yeah, it's 1 turn, and then you upgrade it, and you get a bonus crit chance against them, and then you reduce the cooldown on it, so you can just like, if there's big enemies like the boomers and stuff, they're just kind of hard to take down and are really dangerous. You can just concuss them, and they won't do anything.
Yeah, which is really fun. Like I actually, and this is kind of what I wanted to talk about in the classes, and we'll transition this into the skill economy as well. Is like I actually think a lot of the skills in this game are really fun.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, like I liked chaining stuff together. I liked, taking a lot of the bayonet skills of the Vanguard, and it's like, oh, it's a free bayonet, and it like, demoralizes enemies. Or I don't remember all the effects it does, but like there were multiple skills you could get that would, make your bayonet charge stronger or chain into something else. And like similar with the sniper, if you get all these actions that like cause these status effects or give you bonus actions, and like chaining that stuff together, and when you pull it all off, it's really fun to like my favorite moments in this game were probably starting out my turn, like, all right, what enemies are on the field? Where are my units at? Like, how can I like maximize the effects of my skills for this turn? And like just trying to figure out how to juggle all that.
This game is great for that sort of like efficiency play where you want to like squeeze every little point of damage and movement and like getting everyone into the most safe but lethal positions possible. Like that's what this game is every single turn.
Yep. Yeah, it kind of really rewards that like kind of min-maxing efficiency plays on every turn. Which is really fun to me. Then there's what is the heavy called?
It's just called a heavy.
Oh, it's called a heavy? Okay.
Yeah.
So the heavy has like a big mini Gatling gun type thing.
Yeah, it's called the Mulcher.
Oh, that's right.
From the Gears universe, but yeah, it's a Gatling gun.
Yep. So their whole deal is they get these. What was the stacks you get called?
There's a couple I think there's 2 different ones you can get, but the one I always used was Anchored.
Yeah, Anchored. That's their default skill. So every heavy has that. So I guess we should also say like each of the classes has the skill tree is actually like
it's a square kind of.
It kind of looks like a square, and you start right in the center of the square with one default skill that every class has. So like the heavies is the default one, I believe, is the one that gives them the anchors.
Yeah. But then each quadrant of the square is like a subclass, so you can follow one path to the top right, and that is the demolitionist for the heavy.
Right. So like you can really go hard in the demolitionist. So like I was talking about for the support, I pretty much went all into healing. So like one of the 4 quadrants was like a lot of healing, and I'm just like, no, I'm just going to super specialize into healing. But you could, as you level up your characters, you could kind of spread out a little bit and like get a little bit of each. And
that's something that I did with some of my characters was that the middle line, the the x-axis of the square, right,
Yep.
has like basically the core abilities for all four paths and just some like general buffs to the class
Yeah.
that are usually all pretty good.
Yeah.
So like sometimes I would just be like, I'm just gonna grab all these things in the middle because like then I'll just have a well-rounded
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely the way to go for like kind of a more all-purpose unit, and just kind of buff their core abilities.
Yeah.
I usually, I think, went more towards a specialized.
Yeah, typically that's what I did, but I definitely had a few characters where I just like took the middle section and they did fine.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that. But yeah, the heavies thing are the anchors, which is every time you take a shot, you get a stack of anchored, and each stack of anchored increases, I think, both your damage and your accuracy. But you lose all of your stacks every time you move.
Yes,
So
you maybe lose it all.
So they were really intended to be your lockdown units, your units that you planted at a spot and just locked it down.
Yeah.
So I really liked them on the missions, and I guess we'll talk about like the mission types at some point. But I really liked them on the missions that were like really about defending a zone or a spot or something, because you plant those heavies up at a spot and they just rip everything to shreds.
Yeah, yeah, you get a heavy with the 5 stacks of anchored, which I think was the max. It's just like they can hit anything on the map, and it's gonna hurt real bad because their accuracy and damage are just so high at that point.
Yeah, and they're fun to use, like especially in those defend missions. And I feel like they had the like highest, their weapon, their mulcher had like the highest ammo capacity, and I remember getting a lot of like armor and stuff for them that would just increase ammo. Like I feel like I had around like 10 shots per clip by the end of the game. And I think they get some skills that help them reload too. So like they really just want to be shooting all the time. They're just like, I'm constantly pumping out this mulcher.
Yep. And then the best extra skill I think for them is the redeploy skill, which just lets you. It has a cooldown, so you can't do it every turn, but you can. It gives you extra movement for that turn, and you don't lose your anchored when you move.
Yeah.
You can't shoot after you use it.
That's the drawback, is once you use it, I think it gives you 3 actions and says you can't
shoot with them.
You can't shoot, but you can move without losing your anchor. And I feel like that's a key skill, because I think the way I specialized all of my heavies was actually in the opposite direction from the anchored skill, but I always got the anchored skill anyway, because I feel like that's so key to that unit, is you just want to always keep your stacks. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We had some technical difficulties, but we are back from a short intermission. We are going to resume this deep dive into Gears Tactics. We are still adults talk about cool stuff. I'm still Flex, joined by Nate, and we're just gonna hit the ground running again. And sorry about the abrupt break from part 1, but we're going to keep rolling with this. And I believe we were talking about the heavy and the redeploy skill.
Redeploy.
Which is you want for all your heavies.
Yes.
The other skill I really liked for them was one of the like ultimate end skills of one of the branches, which was, I think it might have been called Ultimate Shot or something like that, but it was you just empty your entire clip. So
wow.
Yeah, it was very, very powerful, especially against high health enemies like a boomer. So like I said, by the end of the game I had really large clips for my heavies, so like you could just like fire 10 shots into one enemy and be like, I'm just gonna tear you up.
I see that ultra shot.
Yeah.
Continue shooting until your mag is empty or the target dies.
Yep. And that was really amazing. I used that quite often.
That sounds very good.
Yes. So the 5th and final class is the Scout, which I saved for last because I feel like that this is the class that was maybe not as obviously useful as the other four classes.
I think especially early on, I
Hmm.
was struggling to find a use for a scout, which I didn't really care that much about because the weird thing about this game is you only get 4 units in a map and there are 5 classes, so you're always omitting one. So
Yep.
I just basically didn't use a scout for like the first half of the game.
Yep. Where I actually stuck with the scout. Like I was like, I want to figure out a use for the scout. Um,
Yeah. So the scout's core thing is that they have a shotgun
mhm.
as their primary weapon, and
Yeah.
then they can cloak.
Yeah, I think their core starting ability is the cloak.
Yeah.
But yeah, their primary weapon is a shotgun, so they are very close range, but they're not as beefy as like the Vanguard, I feel like.
No.
So they rely a little more on like where the Vanguard charges in head first. Um, the Scout is more about kind of skirting around the edges and using cloak to sneak up on people. Like they're more of a hit
Right.
and run type class, I feel like.
I think you're right about that. The main issue I had with them is that I think the shotgun is just bad
Yeah.
as a weapon compared to all the other primaries.
Yep. I as someone who is a scout defender, I
Yeah.
cannot defend the shotgun.
Yeah. They have
Um,
other abilities that make up for it as
yes.
you level them up, but I think the shotgun is just bad.
Yeah, I think the shotgun is pretty bad. Its accuracy is just never good enough. Like even in
Yeah.
short range, I felt like I was just missing way more shots with the shotgun than with any other weapon.
Yeah, and it doesn't do enough more damage to be worth the risk. It only
Yep.
does like a little bit more than a Lancer does.
Yeah. I mean, really, the only great success I had with the shotgun was against wretches.
Hmm.
And even that wasn't amazing, but like I could either through Overwatch or just being up close to a wretch, like shotguns could one shot a wretch, which was
Hmm.
good. And because wretches run up you in melee, like you could set an appropriate Overwatch and they would kind of
Yeah.
run into it and trigger, and you would usually hit that shot.
Yeah.
But like
And they
outside,
do get some stuff to increase their base damage output, like the double shot, which just lets them shoot twice for one action, which
yeah,
is nice.
yeah,
But
which I actually
yeah,
never used that skill.
I used it some, but they definitely have stuff that's better than that.
So my favorite use of the scout, and by the end of the game, I actually felt my scout was one of my best characters,
Hmm.
is one of their branches, one of their skill trees focuses on grenades.
Yeah.
And grenades in this game, I think, are very powerful.
Yes.
And by the end of the game, I had all sorts of grenade abilities and reduced cooldowns on grenades as well. So I
Hmm.
actually, and also the gear helps out with this a lot by the end game,
Yeah.
because I could stack the skills and gear that reduce grenade cooldown such that I could throw a grenade every turn.
Hmm.
Like I got my cooldown to 1 turn, so it was literally just every turn throwing a grenade. And I found a like, because you can equip different grenades, and later on in the game you like find higher damaging grenades you can equip. So
Hmm.
like I equipped my best grenade on my scout and like you get skills that like increase grenade blast radius, and you get all these things that can buff your grenades. So like literally every single turn I was just throwing a super grenade.
Yeah.
And that was really powerful, and like that's where I found the scout got a lot of use. Um, and the cloak allows you to maneuver a lot better because like, oh, say you're stuck in Overwatch, you can just kind of cloak and run out or something.
Yeah.
Um, so that was the cloak was kind of handy. The cloak was never quite as useful as I wanted it to be, I feel
Yeah.
like, but
The most use I got out of the cloak was just like running my scout into a really dangerous position to take out a high value target or close an e-hole that was in a bad place, and then cloak so I could just get away,
right.
which is useful.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. And I did get some skills that like reduce the cloak cooldown, or you could cloak without using an action point, and like there are some things that kind of make it better as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, the scout ended up being all about the grenade, and the grenade was pretty powerful. Like against the final boss, my highest damage dealing unit was my scout because I had
That
that
makes
high
sense.
damage grenade and I could throw it every turn. So I was
Yep.
just throwing grenades on the final boss's face.
Yep.
Um,
God, that final boss.
Yeah, we'll have to get to that at some point. So like we kind of gave an overview of the classes, but
Yeah.
and we kind of touched on it a little bit here and there, but like the action economy in this game, so to speak, is a really big part of it. Because like as we
It
were
is.
talking about, like when you're like starting out a turn and you're kind of surveying the field and trying to figure out how to like optimize your turn, like a lot of the classes have skills that will give them bonus actions or actions can used for free if you hit, or different things like that. So like that was a huge part of this game, and by the end of the game it can get pretty satisfying when you have a bunch of skills to just like really stack up actions, kind of as we were talking about for the sniper.
Yeah.
um,
And the sniper is probably the best class for just being able to stack them on their own. But other classes definitely give, like the support can give a lot of actions to other characters. And then things have like, I think every class has at least one way to just like gain action points through a use of a specific ability.
Yeah.
Like
the
the heavy
scout,
can redeploy, the scout can
if you
do it
close
from cloaking.
yeah, or they also have an ability, if you close an e-hole with a grenade you get two
Oh,
actions
yeah.
back,
Yeah.
kind of in that grenade tree. Yeah, and you have redeploy. I don't remember if the Vanguard had any. They probably did, but
Yeah, I imagine they did, but I can't think of one specifically.
yeah, I mean, at the very least, they got the free bayonet thing where, like, if you killed with bayonet, you got that action point back. So even simple stuff like that. But yeah, like that's a huge component of this game, is just kind of managing your actions. And I think the kind of the universal way they have this in from the start, which I think is a really clever idea and translates one of the core kind of Gears concepts. So like in regular Gears, there's the concept of down but not out, and they have translated that to Gears Tactics. Both your soldiers and enemy units will get in a down but not out state, and when an enemy unit gets in that state, they're crawling around, and if you run up to them, you have a like melee execute option, and they'll do the curb stomp. And whenever you do that, every other soldier other than the one that did it gets a bonus action, which I think is hilarious thematically, because it's like all the other soldiers see you curb stomp an enemy unit, and they just get so stoked about you curb stomping that unit that they're ready to go.
Yeah, they love it. It's great.
I had one really memorable moment where it was a mission where I could only bring 2 people, and I like came up in this area and kind of like, I forget what your default action count is. It's like probably 2 or 3, I think.
3.
It's 3.
Yeah.
And I like kind of set up with some overwatches, and like some stuff happened, and then it was my turn again, and I kind of finished everyone off, and I had 1 action left with each of my units, and there were 4 down soldiers. So with 1 unit, I used my 1 action to go execute, gave the other one another action, they went and executed, and I just kind of like kept leapfrogging back and forth of like replenishing actions, and
Yep.
2 units that each had 1 action to start with executed all of the soldiers, and they still had their actions left.
Yeah, if you line up a good row of downed enemies just right, you can basically like move across the map
Yeah.
for free.
Yeah, which is pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that ability, and I like the core actions available to units, because you have 3 actions by default, and you can move or shoot in any order you want. Whereas in a game like XCOM, once you shoot, your turn is over. Even though you get 2 actions, if you shoot on your first action, your turn's over.
Yep. Yeah, that's actually. Sorry, I just want to pause on that for a second. I feel like Gears Tactics has some really smart, subtle things like that I really appreciate. Is like it was always frustrating in XCOM that I couldn't shoot and then move. It's like, why can't I do that?
Why not?
So
that
like,
makes no sense.
Yeah. So subtle things like that, I think Gears does really well, and it kind of lets you do things in any order.
Yeah, so you can shoot and move and reload all of them the same turn, or you could move 3 times, or you
Mhm.
can just put all 3 of your action points into overwatching, which means your guy can shoot 3 times on their overwatch,
Yeah.
which is really nice.
Yeah. And that's another difference from XCOM. It's like XCOM, when you go into Overwatch, it's always just one shot. But in
Yeah,
this game, in Gears Tactics, when you go into Overwatch, however many actions you had, that's how many Overwatch shots you get. And so, like,
yeah,
you could even stack up more than three. Like, if you use some
yeah,
of those, like, other ways to get extra actions, you could really stack up your Overwatch.
yeah. I definitely remember having some times where I had a good funnel set up and a heavy with anchored, and I would
Hmm.
just like give him actions from the support
Yeah.
and just have him put all of his actions into Overwatch on a funnel and just chew down
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. And that stuff can be really satisfying.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Yeah, that stuff's great.
Yeah.
Um, so unless there's anything else you want to talk about, like classes or skills,
I
um,
think we covered it. As far as that, those sorts of core mechanics and skills and characters and actions. There's definitely a lot of other types of mechanics that we can go over, like enemy types, map types, mission types, and then
mhm.
the real bummer conversation we're gonna have to have is about the loot,
Yeah, the loot and the
like
unit
character
roster
progression.
management.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, because pretty much everything we've talked about for is actually, or we've talked about so far, is all of the stuff I like about this game. Because this game is, I feel like this game is one of those like so close but yet so
yeah,
far. Like it has a lot of things it does really well that I like, and I think that's most of the stuff we've talked about so far. Is
hmm,
I really like the way it's translated regular Gears concepts to a tactics game. I think all of that works really well. I think they've constructed really good classes and skills, like other than the shotgun maybe being a little weak.
yeah,
I think basically everything else about the classes and skills feels really cool and is really fun to use. Like I just really enjoyed like
hmm,
thinking through turns and like, all right, how am I going to use these skills?
yeah,
And we kind of touched on the enemies a little bit. Like I think the
yeah.
enemies work well.
They do.
Um,
So there's pretty good enemy variety we've talked about. We didn't talk about like tickers and stuff, but like they, suffice to say, there's a good amount of enemy variety that all require slightly
mhm.
different tactical considerations, and I think that stuff works well.
Yeah, and I think they introduce those enemies at a good clip that
Yeah,
like it keeps the battles interesting
yeah.
for the most part.
The middling stuff for me in this game is like the map design and mission variety.
Mhm.
Like generally the maps are perfectly fine and good for the most part, but they're very samey throughout the
Yes,
game.
they are.
Um, I think I don't know this for sure, but I feel like there were definitely times where you deploy on the same map in different spots on the
Yeah.
map with different objectives. Um,
I feel like that happened, and if they're not the exact same maps, they're so close that they might as
yeah,
well be.
they might as well be, or maybe they're randomized in some way. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but no, I definitely had that happen where it was like I've been on this map before.
Yeah, and
Um,
then mission variety, there's like 4 different mission types that
yeah,
rotate.
yeah. There's like four or five, like outside of the unique story missions,
Yeah.
like the bosses and stuff. But yeah, there's the defend these supply crates for a certain number of turns.
Hmm.
There's
It's basically a point capture where there are multiple points and you
mhm,
have to stay on them. And every turn that you are on them, but there's not enemies on them, you gain points. And
yeah,
you have to get a certain
certain
number.
number. Yeah,
Um, and
and
then
then
there's like the rescue hostages maps where you have a timer to rescue people,
yeah, we're there in these like
torture pods.
super gnarly looking torture pods.
Yeah.
Those missions were interesting because usually you started with only one or two soldiers.
Yeah, and then you get the people you rescue,
Yeah,
which
and when
would
you
just be a random class, random abilities kind of situation.
yeah, so I actually kind of like those. I mean, I agree that we needed more mission variety, but I kind
Yeah.
of like those missions in that they felt a little bit more dynamic. Like, oh, I have to scrape by with just one or
Yeah.
two for a little bit, and then
Yeah, I don't think I dislike any of the mission types really. It's
Yeah.
just
You see
you
them a
see them
lot.
so many
Yeah.
times. There's the one where you're running away from basically bombers that are just like dropping
Yeah.
bombs on the
That might be the
city as
one
you're
mission
running
type I
through.
kind of didn't like that much.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's dropping bombs and you have to keep moving, and if you don't move quickly enough, you just get blown up.
Yep.
Which towards the end of the game, so I played the game on hard, and towards the end of the game, I ran into a pretty tough one of those missions. And as we'll get into later, the like soldier economy of this game, I got into a situation where it's like, these non-hero soldiers, I'm just gonna
I didn't
let
pick
them.
my good guys for this mission, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, this is a side mission where I have randomly recruited dudes, and
Yeah.
I'm I'm gonna run this unit over here to distract this enemy. I'm gonna run this other one over here to pick up this loot box, and they're gonna get blown up, and my other two are gonna escape next turn anyway because I'm at the end. And sorry, they're gonna die.
Casualties of war.
But yeah, we don't really have to go over all the mission types
No.
in detail. There's most of the other ones are some combination of generic routing the enemies or getting to a certain point and like planting a bomb or looting something. It's like basically get to a point, complete an
Kill all the
action,
enemies.
and then evacuate.
Yeah.
There's a couple flavors of those.
Yeah. So those are fine. They stretch too thin over too much game, especially with the way the side missions work, which just infuriated me by the end of the game.
The required side missions.
Yeah, they shouldn't call them side missions because as far as I could tell, there was no way to not do them. And they make you do a lot of them, especially in Act 3.
Yeah, so the game's broken into 3 acts, and Act 1 was pretty straightforward, but Acts 2 and 3 really started adding in these side missions, and they would require you to do like 2 or 3 out of 3 or 4. So usually
it would
there's
give you
like
a pool of randomized side missions, and you have to pick a couple of them.
Yeah. But it is mandatory to do. They are mandatory to do, and you can't do bonus ones either. So if it's like, oh, you have to do 3 of these 4, you have to do 3 and only 3. You can't do all 4. It's kind of an interesting concept in that these side missions are conceptually occurring simultaneously. So if whatever unit you send on one of them, you can't send on the other one. So if you have to do 3 side missions, you have to have enough units to cover all 3 missions because you can't use any unit for multiple missions.
And you can't just use your best guys in every mission.
Right.
Which is a cool twist on something like that.
Yeah, and I did kind of enjoy the upfront, like when I'd be looking at those missions, be like, okay, I'm going to send these, like kind of that pre-planning of like, all right, I'm going to send these units these soldiers on this mission, these ones on this one, and I'd kind of like divvy them up in my head like ahead of time. And like you said, you don't want to send all your best soldiers on the same mission because then you might struggle on the other one. So you really got to try and balance how you plan for those, which I thought was kind of interesting.
It is.
And that's kind of the story of this game as a whole. Is it has interesting ideas, and what Nate's already started touching on is as the game goes on, it kind of loses steam.
Yes, it really, really does.
Yeah, and that's really a bummer because I think it does have really cool ideas.
So I guess we can talk about why it loses steam here. So like you said, Act 1 is the shortest act and pretty straightforward. I think it has very few, if any, side missions and the fewest story missions.
Yeah, I want to say, I don't know why these numbers are in my head. I want to say Act 1 had 6 chapters and Acts 2 and 3 each had 8 chapters.
Yes, but then they had side missions sprinkled in between those chapters, and the number of side missions you had to do increased each act. So 3 is the longest and 1 is the shortest by a good margin. And so it would already be getting sort of repetitive just by the length of the game and how many missions you're doing because of the limited variety of mission types and maps and map types. But the thing that really bummed me out more than anything with this game is just the progression systems. Yeah. And like how your squad builds out over time and how that ends up feeling as you're going through Act 3, where that grind and the slog really starts to set in.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I think this is where the game loses compared to like an XCOM
yes.
is like this game, I think on like some core tactical level, I think it compares pretty well to a something like an XCOM. Like I think
Very well.
some of the tactical things XCOM might do a little better, the unit skills or whatever, and some things I think Gears does better. Maybe even overall, I might like Gears Tactics a little better in some of those areas, but
Yeah, I think in terms of just the like
the raw tactics.
the actions and how you use your soldiers and the types of skills you can do and the difference between all the classes and what their skill trees allow for.
Mm-hmm.
Like I probably prefer all of that stuff over XCOM, Enemy Unknown, and XCOM 2.
Yeah, yeah, and
It feels like a more freeform, more like bombastic version of those, right? Like
yeah,
it's just gonna give you all the really cool stuff you want.
yeah. But it's all it is more bombastic, but it's also like it's not dumbed down either. It's not like oh, we're just throwing grenades and chainsawing and it's fun. Like it is a really thoughtful tactical game. But what XCOM has that Gears doesn't is a really good strategic layer with really satisfying progression.
Yes, and all that stuff does not work in Gears Tactics.
Yeah, Gears basically, because like in XCOM, between missions, you go to your base, you do research, you deploy satellites, you try,
You're spending resources to build specific gear for specific soldiers.
Yeah.
You're outfitting people with different stuff.
And Gears basically has no between mission stuff. Like you can recruit soldiers, you can swap around gear, like you can do kind of some of that upkeep type of stuff, but none of it's progression, none of it's like making really interesting choices. It's just like it's almost busy work. It's almost like, all right, I got this loot, like let me swap out straight upgrades on my gear and then roll right into the next mission.
And what it kind of replaces that with is the randomized loot, which you pick up during missions, which I don't mind the like pickups during missions. Like it adds another level of tactical consideration of like, okay, how do I get this crate safely?
Yeah,
that's kind of fun. But when you get it and it's just like another +7 accuracy barrel for the Lancer that I already have 15 of, I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. I had 2 or 3 times in the back half of the game, I had to sit down and actively sift through my gear and just delete stuff because you get so many copies of the same thing that it makes like sifting through it to equip stuff just such a pain.
And like occasionally I would get a piece of gear that would make me be like, oh wow, that's really cool. That's going to change the build for this character. But most of the time it's just like minor stat buffs.
Yeah, like there was some
meaningful.
There were some really powerful, like I think the support had some really powerful skills that would either some combination of increase their healing powers and or reduce cooldowns on healing. And like I said, I got gear that I put on the scout that reduced grenade cooldown. And it's like you sometimes get those things that like just do like actually change the way you play and like change your build. And like because without some of that gear, my scout couldn't have been the overpowered grenade monster they were. So like, but that's in the minority. Like most of the gear, like you said, is like here's +5% accuracy for for my Lancer.
And you just get so much of it.
Yeah.
And it's all randomized. So like I don't know. That's probably just a me and you thing. I'm sure some people love randomized loot, but like in a linear story-based game, I'm just always going to be frustrated with randomized loot because I'm going to feel like, well, what if I just get the bad die rolls and I don't get anything good? Yeah, and that's not my fault, but I'm not going to start the game over it.
Yeah, and the gear was powerful. Like Like, I mean, we joke about the 5% accuracy, but like there were also some that gave like +40 health or +3 ammo capacity, or like some of those effects were really powerful.
Yeah. And
So
early on, I didn't mind it. I will say, for at least the first act,
yeah.
probably the second act, I was okay with the loot. I didn't love it, but I was okay with it.
Hmm.
It was in that third act where I was just like getting a bunch of the same stuff. I wasn't getting anything new that was like build changing by that point. And so it was just like, I don't know. I'm just picking up all these crates and then looking at it and being like, nah, I don't want any of that. I'm just gonna keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, I still tried to pick it all up through the end of the game because this is what randomize anything does is it's like, oh,
Yeah.
this could be the good one.
Hmm.
So I still tried to pick it up. And I did enjoy the aspect of like, oh, trying to consciously build my units in a way that um, like really affect their builds and everything.
Yeah, and
Um,
like really supported what you were going for with them, like the grenade stuff that you were talking about. Like I gave my heavies all the biggest magazines possible,
mhm.
so they could just keep shooting forever.
Yep.
That kind
Yeah.
of stuff is great.
Yeah. Yeah. So like that really fed into the character customization, but it was too unwieldy. I feel like it just needed less. That just needed to be less loot. I mean, I would prefer it to not even be randomized, but
Yeah, me
even if
too.
it's randomized, there just needed to be a lot less of it
Hmm.
and just reduce the amount you got because it made it a pain to just sift through it all and equip stuff, and it like
Yeah.
that just wasn't like there were fun ideas in there, but the execution of it was just not fun.
Yes.
Um,
And then the other part of character progression that grinds to a halt in Act 3 is your just general character leveling.
yeah, it slows
Um,
down so much.
I don't understand why the level curve in this game is what it is
Yeah.
because I mean, you start this game with level 1 characters
Hmm.
and you finish the game with level like 6 or 7
Six or seven,
characters.
yeah. And
Yeah.
you probably get to like level 3 or so, or maybe even 4 by the end of Act 1. I mean, like we talked about Act 1 being
Yeah.
a short act, and like you probably gain a level, at least 2 levels by the
Yeah,
end of Act
Act 1
1.
felt good. Like Act 1 you feel like you're making constant
Hmm.
progress. Act 2 it's like okay, it's taking a little longer, but by the end of that you're like level 5 or whatever.
Hmm.
And then you go through this long Act 3, the longest act in the
Yeah.
game and you gain like 1 level for
Maybe
your
one,
character.
maybe one level at most. Yeah, it really does grind down to a halt. Like
It's
it's
so weird.
yeah, it's a really dramatic change, which is a bummer because like you look through that skill tree and you're like, oh, there's so many
Yeah.
good skills, and it's like it would be cool to just be able to get a lot of skills, and like I could see maybe why they wouldn't want you to get more because you could get
Yeah, it
really
may be game
powerful.
breaking if you like can max out 2 of the skill trees within a class.
Hmm.
That may be game breaking. I don't know, but
Yeah,
like it's
but
such a bad feeling to be sitting there in Act 2 being like, oh, I'm planning out. I'm gonna get this next. I'm gonna get that next. This sounds great,
yeah,
and then you never get past the next step.
yeah. You just really like you kind of hit that wall with the skill tree, and you're like, all right. And as we've talked about, you play so many more missions in Act 3, and your characters just really aren't changing. So
Mm-mm.
you kind of end up like you get better loot, but your characters otherwise really just aren't changing, and you're kind of playing the same missions over and over again.
Yeah, and I didn't even find in Act 3 I was getting much better loot. Like, I feel like by the time I was a mission or two into Act 3, my characters were basically set with their skill trees
Right.
and the loot they were going to use. I maybe found a piece or two of gear.
Yeah.
Another
I
character may have leveled up, but like I just felt like 2/3 at least of Act 3, I didn't
yeah.
change any of my characters a bit.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely slowed down. I do feel like I found some pretty substantial pieces of gear during Act 3,
Yeah.
but it wasn't enough to make up for the lack of everything else.
Yeah.
Um,
It's such a shame.
yeah, like, I feel like there is a version of this game that like in terms of length chops off basically half of Act 3
Yeah.
and like slightly, rebalances the progression to last that length, and it's like
Yeah.
those two simple changes would just make it a lot better.
It really, really would.
So I don't remember exactly how long I played this game. I would guess in the like 30-ish hour range.
I think it was around 30 hours, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not like
It's not an insanely long game,
yeah.
but
but when the progression feels like it tops out around 20 hours in,
Yeah, when you're, in the upper teens or maybe at 20 hours, and it's like, okay, play
You
another
kind of
10 to 12 hours
yeah.
without your characters really making any meaningful progression.
Yeah, and I do think the game got harder through Act Three.
It does.
It definitely kept ramping up, and then for your characters to not keep up with that, like kind of, it really forced me to use the skills I already had better.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it definitely provided a good challenge.
yeah, so like in that sense, it felt like the game pushed me to like it's like I got those skills by early in Act Three, and then the game really pushed me to master them and like over
Yeah, that,
repeated use. So I mean, I
that's a
could
fair
maybe see
argument.
someone making an argument that like that's the appeal of Act Three, but
I could see that.
because like if you think about some RPG systems or like anything with a leveling system, not just
Yeah,
RPGs, oftentimes you get your max stuff near the end and you don't really have that much time to play with it.
that's
So I
true.
mean, maybe I could see someone making an argument that like, oh no, you kind of hit your max near the beginning of Act Three, sure, but then you had a whole act to play with it.
Yeah.
Um, but I still would have rather have a shortened Act Three.
Yeah. And I don't think it's quite interesting enough in Act 3 to warrant that.
Hmm.
Like maybe if they had really wowed me with some like specific encounter designs,
Yeah,
then maybe. But it is still mostly the same type of stuff, just harder and more enemies, which
yeah,
was fun, but yeah.
yeah. And then on top of that, my probably personal biggest bummer is that the soldiers felt completely disposable.
Yeah.
So they have, like, if you think of XCOM, it takes time to build up characters. So, like, if you lose a high level character, like, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And that adds a lot of tension and, like, incentive to really, because, like, your high level soldiers are very powerful, so you want to use them, but
Yep.
you also don't want to lose them
Right.
because that's a big setback and it'll take time to level up a new soldier. In Gears Tactics, you recruit from this pool of soldiers, and the pool of soldiers you recruit from just kind of levels up as the missions
Yeah.
go. So late game, if you lose a level 6 soldier, in the
Just
back
recruit
half
a
of Act
level 6
3,
soldier.
yeah, you just recruit another level 6 soldier,
Yeah.
and you can pick the exact same skill. Like if I lost a level 6 scout, for example, you could go recruit another level 6 scout, give them all the same skills. When a soldier dies, you get their gear back, so you could just slap the same gear right back on them, and it's
Yep.
basically the exact same soldier.
Yeah. And then in addition to that, there's the hero characters that are, story named characters that the game forces you to use all the time.
Hmm.
So even if you really wanted to use one of your random guys that you've picked up and spec'd a certain way, like a lot of time you're not gonna get the option to.
Yeah. Yep. In side quests you can,
Yeah.
and it was this weird dynamic because like, each mission you can carry maximum of 4. You can bring maximum of 4 soldiers, and the story missions would generally make you use at least 2 or 3 heroes.
Yep.
So like, you're really only getting maybe 1 or 2 other custom soldiers. But then on the side missions, you might have to do 3 side missions, any of them using between 2 to 4 soldiers. So you might be having to use, 8 to 10 soldiers on your side missions.
Yeah.
So like all of a sudden you need a bunch of soldiers that you've never
Spec'd
been
out
using on
and
main missions.
and yeah, it's a very strange dynamic where it's like, okay, I've got this core group of people, mostly the heroes, characters that I use on the story missions, but now, oh, I've got this set of side missions, so now I need to spec out like
Yeah.
8 people.
Yeah, a lot of
10
times I would
10
be
people.
like, yeah, a lot of times I'd be like, all right, time to go hit the recruit, barracks and just like recruit some some soldiers, and I don't know. I frequently did the thing of like, all right, I'm dismissing my level 4 and recruiting a level 5 of the same class because I just
Yeah,
haven't
no
been
reason
using
not
this level
to.
4 in the story
Yeah.
missions, and now I can recruit higher level ones, so I'm just kind of replacing them.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah, and that's like it made your soldiers not feel important, or like I never got attached to the soldiers or their progression, or like it just made them feel so disposable. And like that's such a bummer because usually like one of my favorite things about tactic games in general, not even just XCOM, is like seeing your units grow and like going through that character progression and like being excited about like, oh, this, I remember when this unit was a scrub and now they, have these powerful abilities and all this. And like Gears Tactics just does not build that attachment to your units, and it
Not at all.
doesn't make for those interesting moments or stories where your characters are building up and all of a sudden, or your scrub is now powerful and you're just churning through nameless soldiers basically. Like they don't matter.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah, and that was a bummer. And I think when you combine that with the loot and the slowed progression and the, to an extent, the mission variety, but also just the lack of any other strategic layer progression outside of the missions, like it really did kind of, for me, boil the game down to the moment-to-moment tactics I think were excellent.
Yes.
Everything else around that I think I found disappointing to various degrees.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately kind of where this game fell for me overall, is like those tactics are really, they have some really great ideas in the tactical layer. Like there's some just really fun, gnarly stuff in there. And then the glue that kind of holds it together just did not work as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to see a sequel to this game where they figure out some of those progression mechanics a little better and the pacing of the game.
Yeah.
And just make that all work together in a more satisfying way.
Yeah.
And keep the core gameplay.
Yeah. Because all that other stuff either feels weird, like the loot or the soldier stuff, or it drags the game down as it goes on, like the progression. And that stuff just could be ironed out more.
Yeah.
I feel like the only other big thing to talk about, and make sure if I'm forgetting anything, you get it in here, is maybe some of the story, but I'm thinking more of like some of the set PC moments, like kind of mentioned that the final boss was not good, so like maybe some of those moments we can talk about.
Yeah, we could talk very briefly about the story and the boss encounters, I think are worth mentioning, because they are different. I mean, the story is, so Gears of War is a pretty basic war story all told, but generally those games are considered to have like a decently told narrative about war bros doing war stuff. They're kind of sad. They're kind of sad about it, but they like doing the war stuff anyway. And so this is definitely in that vein of like they don't really like war, but man, they're really good at it.
Yeah, and there's a consistent theme of like soldiers doing stuff because they have to, not because they want to.
Right.
And kind of rebelling against their superiors. And Gears Tactics definitely has that vibe as well. Like the main character, Gabe, I think his name was.
Yeah, Gabe.
Very memorable character. Like got in arguments with the dude giving him orders frequently. Like, there's that's a very common Gears theme.
Yeah, the whole thing of he had gotten out of the COG, the sort of fascist military that is fighting the Locusts in the Gears universe, and then he had gone off and he was doing his own thing, just helping people, but he got pulled back in because things were so bad, and then turns out, guess what? The fascist military is bad, and they try to kill him. And it's just like all that stuff is very standard Gears of War, and it's fine.
And I mean, and to some extent, very standard war video game story, like even broader than Gears. So
it's all fine, but it doesn't really do anything memorable.
No, I mean some of the characters were okay, but like the overall beats were just very standard and nothing special. It was interesting to see them actually come up with a primary antagonist that had a name and a face, and you encountered him multiple times throughout the campaign. I feel like
Yeah.
Gears games in the past have been more of a kind of broad war story of like, oh, the enemy is just the Locust army, and it's
Yeah.
not specific character enemies. So I mean,
Yeah.
that was one kind of difference in the storytelling, but I mean, it still felt like a very standardish war thing still.
Yeah, for sure. And they tie it in with, sort of the core Gears original trilogy storyline. Like it takes place before those games, and you get to see the Hammer of Dawn strikes that
Right.
basically like decimate the planet, which is kind of cool to see.
Yeah, it is kind of cool to get kind of that, like if you care about Gears lore at all, which, I could kind of give or take, take it or leave it, but like it does have those cool moments. And like, I feel like by the end of the original Gears trilogy, you have seen and used the Hammer of Dawn so much that it becomes like kind of a non-thing. Whereas like this game kind of reminds you like, oh yeah, like the Hammer of Dawn is very serious. Like,
It's messed up.
yeah, like that's a real big deal.
Yeah.
So there's definitely there's kind of some neat things in that realm.
Yeah. But as you go through, so we talked about 3 acts. There's a final boss fight to each act that is mechanically a little different.
Yeah,
The first one is a Brumac, which is kind of a classic Gears of War boss fight.
yeah. Which I actually kind of struggled with that fight.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I got pinned. So the thing with the Brumac is it has like tanks on its back, and they start your soldiers kind of 2 on each side of the arena, and the Brumac's in the middle.
Yeah.
And the way they kind of play it is like, oh, one of your soldiers shoots the Brumac will turn to them, it'll catch their attention, and your soldiers on the other side get to shoot its exposed back, and you're supposed to like do this ping pongy thing, back and forth. For me, somehow the Brumac got too much on one side of the arena, so
you just couldn't get away from it.
yeah, 2 of my soldiers were too pinned and could not
Yeah.
get away from him. So I was like having to spend entire turns like running, like using all 3 of my actions to just run and heal, and like I couldn't, turn it around with one character and shoot with another because I was having to spend so much just getting away from it. And like once I kind of got in that position, it kind of snowballed, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that is the thing with the boss fights in this game. All 3 of them is like, it's probably gonna just snowball one way or the other. Like you're either just gonna like dominate and win very easily, or you're gonna get in a tricky position, and that's gonna put you in a worse position, and then that's gonna put you in an even worse position.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, it's gonna go one way or the other really hard, I think.
Yeah, because that Brumac fight, I had a very desperate, like, at the end, it was a little bit of the Hail Mary shots at the end. It's like, all right, I know it's almost dead. My units are really scrambling. It's like, all right, I'm, kind of buy my time, one extra turn, set up for one, all-out assault on it. And, like, if I hadn't killed it the turn I did, I probably would have had to restart the mission because my units, it was the kind of last desperate shot.
Yeah.
Which was kind of exciting, but also a little frustrating because I felt like maybe I never really had a great sense for how I got in that position. It was never really apparent to me where I misstepped. Like I'm sure I did misstep somewhere, but it was hard to identify where.
Yeah.
And that was kind of and the fights are long. I think that's what makes it frustrating is the boss fights are all of them are very long.
They're very long, and the way they keep you on your toes is by constantly adding in regular enemies.
Yeah, they're always spawning in.
So that basically means that you have to constantly readjust whatever you're doing at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely... And I think if they weren't so long, that would have been a little... Because it's like, if it was a 15-minute fight and, it snowballs in the bad way and you have to restart, like that's not a big deal. But when it's like a close to an hour-long fight or something,
Right.
that can be pretty wild.
Yeah.
They do checkpoint you during the missions, but because of the way it snowballs, like rolling back to a checkpoint probably doesn't get you out of the bad situation you were in.
Yeah.
But Yeah, so I had a little bit of dicey time in the Brumac, but still beat it the first try.
Mm-hmm.
The boss of Act 2 was the spidery thing. What's
The
that called? Corpser?
Corpser,
Yeah.
yeah, which is the big underground spider things. Um,
That
Again,
fight.
it was pretty straightforward. I feel like kind of a fight. Like you just hit it
Yeah.
enough to expose it because it holds its legs as armor,
Hmm.
and then you deal real damage to it. Of course, you're constantly managing the additional enemies coming in.
Yeah. Yeah, that one of the three boss fights felt the least mechanically unique.
Yeah,
I
and then the
think
final fight
your favorite fight in the game.
is so long.
It's really long.
And they separate out your squad of 4 characters, which are the 4 hero characters. You don't get to pick who you take on this mission at all.
Yeah, that's. I feel like that the boss fights are where the bummer of being forced to use the heroes come into play the most.
And it splits the 4 hero characters into 2 groups of 2, so they can't even interact with each other. They're on completely separate parts of the field. And the boss continuously, who is the main bad guy on one of the flying things,
whose name I forget entirely.
I don't even remember. He's evil man McLocus. I don't know.
Yeah.
He constantly flies back and
Udon.
forth. Udon, that's right.
Yeah.
He constantly flies back and forth between the 2 sides, so you
Yeah.
have to like clear ads constantly on both sides and get your people into the best position to deal damage to him once he goes back to their side
Yeah.
without him hitting you. And he just has so much health, and he has all these turns where he's off screen, and then there are more enemies coming in, and you have to clear them. And it takes so long. I was
Yeah.
so done with that fight.
Yeah, it's really long. It's really repetitive. You kind of fall into a groove.
Yeah.
Though, like you said, it can snowball. So one of my that fight for me was kind of ridiculous because they put my sniper and my scout on one side together, and those were my 2 strongest units.
Yeah.
And they put the support and the vanguard together on the other side, which are, those are your 2 lancer units, your regular and your retro lancers. So they're kind of your mid-range units, and like they just weren't as good for me at that point in the game. And like they struggled. Like that side of the arena like really kind of started snowballing out of control. And by the end of the mission, like that side was at a point where I was just having them hang on. Like early on, both my sides were dealing damage to the boss, but by the end, the last couple rotations, the support and vanguard side, I wasn't even attempting to deal damage to the boss. They were just pure survival mode. I'm just purely focusing on the regular spawning enemies, just trying to survive and hang in there, because if a hero dies, the mission fails.
Yep.
And the other side was just clearing out the regular enemies so fast with my super grenade every turn and the sniper's crazy abilities. Like they're just clearing out everything so fast that like they were just sitting there twiddling their thumbs while the other 2 on the other side of the arena are just like having all these enemies bearing down on them. Like it was night and day how well I did on each side. But then when the boss went to the sniper scout side, they just unloaded on him and just completely ruined him.
Yeah.
I also wish my sniper could have shot across the gap and helped the other side, but they couldn't actually do it.
Yeah, they block line of sight just enough that you can't actually do that. The one thing you could do is if you got people near the center, like the point that divided the 2 sides, you could toss grenades over.
Yeah, but that was pretty much it.
That was it.
Yeah, but you couldn't really get that close to the side because then you're too far away from the boss to
it wasn't useful.
Yeah, at least for grenades, because I always wanted to be able to hit the boss in the face with a grenade, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. I wish I could have brought my heavy in there. I had a rando heavy guy that I had the whole game. He was like in my starting squad at the beginning of Act 1. He was level 7. My man Tyrone.
Nice.
He was amazing. Couldn't bring him to the final fight.
Yeah, that's a bummer. Yeah, I had, because you get because the main character Gabe is the hero support. And then Sid is the hero vanguard, and I think you start the game with him as well. So like
you start the game with those 2. and then you get the sniper
pretty
either
early.
later in Act 1
Yeah.
or in beginning of Act 2. I don't remember.
So like those three, you pretty much have the whole game. So like I
Yeah.
never trained a rando of those classes really.
Right.
Like by the end when you're doing side missions, I'd recruit extra ones,
Yeah, you need multiple.
but both a heavy and a scout, because the hero scout you don't get until like halfway through Act 3, like it's late in the
Yeah.
game. So I trained, similar to your heavy, I trained up a heavy and a scout from the beginning of the game, and they stayed with me the whole game. And yeah, the heavy you just don't have the option to bring, and the heavy actually probably would have been pretty good in that final
Yeah,
mission.
Heavy would have been great in that fight. You
Yeah,
just set him up in the middle and anchor
yeah.
everything.
I feel like the Vanguard specifically was the weak link. Like I would have traded out my Vanguard for a heavy. I think is the trade I would have made,
Yeah,
because
definitely.
I feel like the Vanguard is a pretty mobile unit with the bayonet and stuff, and like that final arena was actually a pretty cramped arena,
Yeah.
and there just wasn't any benefit to moving around a lot,
No.
which would really lend itself well to the heavy of just planning there and
Hmm.
just shooting a bunch. Um,
But oh well.
yeah, I guess one other lore thing was I forget her name, but wasn't the scout hero unit, isn't that Kate's mom
Oh,
from?
was it? I didn't actually catch that.
Yeah, I forget. But yeah, there was
That seems like
some,
it could be right.
and Gabe was Kate's dad, like because they ended up hooking up at the end of the game.
Yeah,
Um,
that's interesting. I didn't catch that.
yeah, so I think Kate's parents, Kate from Gears 4 and 5, her
Hmm.
parents were the two of the main characters in this game.
Yeah.
Because Gabe Diaz, isn't that his last name?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then the other weird thing that happened with story was like at one point you realize like, oh, the research into rust lung, which was some disease that preceded the locust, is what created the locust. And I was like, did we already know that from the original show? I can't remember.
I can't
Like,
remember either.
I feel like maybe they do say that at some point in the original, like they find out that humans created the locust. But I was literally sitting there when they said that, like, is this new information, or did they, or is this just repeating the information from the original trilogy? And these characters just found out early. I don't know.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
don't
it
know.
was a funny thing.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have played most of the Gears games, but
Yeah.
my Gears lore is
Don't remember.
fairly spotty, to be honest. My Gears knowledge.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I guess before we get to like final thoughts and wrap up, is there anything else about Gears Tactics you wanted to touch on?
I don't think so. I think we covered it.
Okay, yeah. So I guess we'll start heading towards wrapping up this podcast. We've kind of said it a little bit, but what's kind of your final takeaways and overall impression of Gears Tactics?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the core gameplay. I really like the classes and the skill trees and all the action economy stuff we talked about. But yeah, they really just lost me in the third act with how much progression grinds to a halt and how repetitive it ends up feeling. And then that final boss fight was just the nail in the coffin. I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. You had warned me that final boss was long, and I had to like intentionally try and carve out like a 2 hour chunk of time
It
to
was
make
literally
sure.
like a 2 hour fight.
Yeah, it was long. I think I completed it like 1 a.m. or something.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah. Anything else? Any other final thoughts?
No.
Yeah, that's pretty similar for me. As we've said, like the actual moment-to-moment tactics, I actually really liked, and I'm kind of a tactics person in general. Like I really like XCOM, I really like Fire Emblem, Advance Wars, like all of those kind of games. And I really think they came up with some clever ideas, and they translate. Like I think having it in the Gears universe worked really well. And I think they have a lot of clever mechanics between the way the action economy works, between the character skills, between even simple stuff like the executions and Overwatch, like some of the core mechanics. Like I think all that stuff fits together really well, and I think the enemy varieties are good. It is good, and I pretty much enjoyed that throughout. it's everything around that was kind of the bummer. And I feel like there is an edited version of this game that tones down the loot, that just shortens the game overall, that takes out some of the repetitiveness, that tweaks some of the character progression and the soldier management. I don't really like the hero concept as a whole, but I guess I get why they do that for the story. But the whole thing we were talking about of most of your heroes or most of your soldiers just don't feel meaningful. They just feel totally disposable.
Right.
If they could have somehow figured out all of that more quote unquote meta stuff to flow better and make for an experience that stays meaningful through the entirety of Act 3, I think this could have been a really pretty awesome game.
Yep.
And I would be curious if they made a Gears Tactics 2, what changes they made, what kind of stuff they might tweak. Could they make it a better game? Because some of that stuff just doesn't, the loot doesn't feel like it fits. The progression doesn't feel like it fits. There's just stuff that feels sloppy. And like you said, I definitely hit the fatigue during Act 3. Is this game needed to be 5 to 10 hours shorter and a smoother progression, and it would have been pretty cool. Overall, I still liked it because, like I said, the moment-to-moment tactics was still engaging, and I never really considered stopping even when it got to a grind. If it had been another 10 hours, I maybe would have stopped, but I still enjoyed it overall. I think for me, it's more of a bummer feeling than it is an outright dislike, if that makes sense. It's you see the potential. It's there.
Right there.
Yeah. But so close, but yet so far. But I still enjoy it overall. Good game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to do it for our podcast.
Sounds good.
Covered pretty good amount of stuff, some pretty good ground. I enjoyed chatting about Gears Tactic, digging into it's a very mechanics heavy talk, but I like talking about that stuff.
Yeah, it's fun.
But I think we are going to sign off for this Gears Tactics edition of the ATACS podcast. I have been Flex, joined by Nate, and we are going to sign off here, and we will see you next time.